Welcome to the 3Haunted podcast, where we bring you all things horror, supernatural, folklore, mythology, and all things that go bump in the night.
What's up, everybody? This is your co-host, Ashley Lunar Goddess, Gorilla Girl filmmaker and horror-loving cinephile. I'm just your average podcast-producing badass.
I'm John Thomas. Some would say that I go a little too far with my love of all things horror, paranormal, and meta, but I say, talk nerdy to me, and I'm all yours.
I'm BJ Sewura, an aspiring paranormal musician who plays live for the dead because the living just doesn't want to hear me.
The Dead of Winter Horror Network and Nick Kane from the 508 Productions invite you to endure the most terrifying immersive experience in all of podcasting. Beneath the Red Umbrella, now available wherever you listen to podcasts. Beneath the Red Umbrella, when the snow falls, the killing season begins.
What's up, ghouls, gals, and meta pals? In today's episode, we'll be discussing crystals with special guest, author, and teacher, Nicholas Pearson. Nicholas has written many books about crystals, Reiki, and plant spirits. His latest book, Crystals for Psychic Self-Defense, is out now. Welcome to the show, Nicholas.
Thank you so much for having me.
Very excited to have you on. I am a big crystal lover. I definitely don't have the experience that you do, so very happy to have you on.
Well, it'll be my pleasure to share some of that experience.
I love it. Now, how long have you been in the world of crystals?
I think formally my mineral collection started at the age of 8, so we're just going to say more than 3 decades. Before that, I was the stereotype, the kid that picked up rocks. I was so enamored with my grandmother's gemstone jewelry. She was especially fond of like vintage turquoise, but I just marveled over rock and gem. And I guess my grandfather saw this behavior repeatedly and decided to give me my first piece of quartz, which is still, something very precious in my collection today.
That's amazing.
What kind of quartz was it?
It is a piece of clear quartz from, later in life, I can do the ID. It's from Hot Springs, Arkansas. It's got some minor amounts of like hydrated iron oxides. It's got some like golden veils, some white wisps. But it's just kind of this irregularly shaped. It's got like 3 points coming out of the same body. And it just felt like a piece of magic. Like he'd given me something straight out of a storybook and I had to know more.
That's amazing. Is it polished or like a raw or partial?
It is a raw specimen. The only treatment it's had, I'm sure, is a quick acid bath, oxalic acid, or something similar to remove all the limonite-rich soils from the surface. But that kind of rustic shape and all the imperfections were, it gives it a real organic kind of feel.
I love that. I think depending on the mineral, I love them in their raw form, especially minerals like tourmaline. I love that in the raw form versus polished. Not that there's anything wrong with tumbled and polished. That tends to be my preference.
My thing is always like, what is going to captivate me? So some specimens are kind of ugly until they get polished up. I appreciate an ugly rock if it tells a story. So I have nothing against that. But, sometimes you get a piece of gem rough that just doesn't do anything. And the moment they polish it, it comes to life. So I'm an equal opportunity collector.
That's amazing. I've just gotten into it maybe this past year and a half. Mainly because I do starting to do a lot of paranormal investigations, and I hear that, the rocks help a lot, and I've kind of jumped on board of that train, and, anything that can help protect me and all the things that I go into, I'm all for it. And that's why I'm excited to have you on, just to ask about those kinds of things. 'Cause it sounds like, obviously you know about all of these things, and my biggest things are like which hand to put it on, like if it's a bracelet versus like a ring, or that kind of stuff. And I don't know if it matters necessarily, but I'd love to pick your brain on that.
Yeah, absolutely. We can dive straight in if you want.
I do. Before we go into that aspect, I'd like to kind of go back to the beginning a bit, but For you, when you started really diving into the world of minerals, which approach did you go through? Because I feel like there's so many ways to tackle it, right? You have the actual like mineral properties that are physically present, like you said, the soil and the composites of the different minerals. But then there's also the metaphysical properties that come along with them. So how did you even start to tackle learning?
As an 8-year-old, you kind of start with whatever is in front of you, especially in a pre-internet world. So, other families did like church and stuff on weekends. That never happened in my household. So my dad and I would go to the library every other weekend. And as I got older and read faster and faster every single weekend until I could take myself. And, it might be one week a book on earth science written for kids, and then the next week it might be folklore and fairy tales or world mythology. I remember all those like eyewitness picture books, and I would just hunt through them for things carved out of rock and stone and gem. And I appreciate culture and language. I'm a nerd about a whole lot of things, but I found with the world of crystals that I could wear a science hat, wear a historical kind of folkloric hat, and then by the time I was a teenager, I found out that this wasn't just a historical practice. It wasn't merely something that like we have records of people believing in previously, but they still did it. People still practice crystal healing. So I might have been about, 11 or 12 when I found an early book on crystal healing in a local bookstore. And I just wanted to know more and more and more. So I kind of wore all those hats simultaneously. I fancy myself a bridge between kind of the spiritual and the scientific world. I think that each one can provide an understanding the other lacks. And so I like that I've always got something to learn.
Did you find that any of the minerals resonated with you as you were handling them? Like, did you connect to any of them in a way that was a bit more on the spiritual side versus the science side?
Yeah, absolutely. That very first piece of quartz just resonated with me in a big way. It seems to have unlocked something that's changed the entire arc of my life. And I didn't have language around that. When you're 8 years old and you are not diagnosed with ADHD, but probably should have been, that came 30 years too late. The immense stillness that I could cultivate by sitting with a rock, a mineral, a gemstone, a piece of the earth I found in a gravel parking lot, it didn't really matter. If it spoke to me, it spoke to me. And it wasn't necessarily about, certain gem varieties or certain species of minerals. It was always like the individual. This crystal spoke to me. That pebble from the backyard spoke to me. This thing we found at the beach or on a family trip to the mountains. And I kind of started from those places. But when I was, probably around 14 or 15, I got a piece of quartz from a relatively new thing on the market at the time. They call them Lemurian sea crystals. And I just remember having the trippiest meditative experiences with this crystal, like spontaneous communication with whatever that indwelling consciousness was, for which I also did not have adequate language. And that kind of opened some new doors for me. And I've been a quartz lover since the beginning, but anytime I can find a weird and unusual variety of quartz, especially when it doesn't quite fit into the textbooks, I like those weird exceptions to the rules, or the stuff that gets overlooked or forgotten, or again tells a really interesting geological story because something about that story makes its personality unique.
Is there a particular quartz that you like the best or that has moved you the most? I mean, I've had a couple experiences with smoky quartz in particular, and I don't know if that's something that you have an experience with yourself.
So I love them all. I have a really special fondness for natural, good quality citrine. I've got a couple good connections for folks who import some phenomenal stuff from Zambia, which is probably the finest quality, largest, like gem-rich deposit of natural citrine that the earth has opened up for us in decades. And so I'm really, really over fond of that material. I do love smoky quartz. I have this piece of celestial smoky quartz that one of my best friends recently gifted to me for my birthday. It's like wafer thin with this complex overgrowth. But whatever's got something interesting. I don't want just a simple six-sided prism with a point on it. I want things happening on the interior. I want unusual surface textures. I want to see other minerals growing alongside it. So I often kind of gravitate towards things that are not picture perfect, because I find so much more mystery in them. I think, like, as far as collecting goes, there's one particular batch of quartz that comes from Japan that, like, locally, if you translate the name for it, they call them moss ball crystals, because they have these little tiny spherical inclusions of a mineral called chamosite, and they look like fuzzy little moss balls, like those things that you can find in the Japanese rivers. And they're also full of like needles of rutile and threads of amphibole, and they look like this underwater world, and I find them so fascinating. They don't generally get very big, but they're still very pricey. So I've got a few of those, probably a few more than I need, but they're high on my list again because they tell a weird story. Energetically, there's just something so magical about them. And I actually snuck a picture of them into the new book, because I was talking about the chlorite group. And chamosite is a chlorite mineral, so I got to demonstrate what it looks like on its own or inside quartz that way.
I love garden quartz for that reason, that you see just all of the different like natural elements inside of it, and it just they capture my heart every time. And it's a problem sometimes because I'm like, I want that one, and each one is so unique and rare, and then I've got too many, and I'm like, what do I do with them all?
Yeah, choice paralysis is a real thing in this world. I help source for one of our local, very long-standing occult bookstores, and sometimes I get so overwhelmed because everyone is so unique in its own way that I end up with none of them because I can't just pick one and I can't take them all. So clearly they have to go to someone else who's more decisive than me.
It's fascinating what our earth can create, right? Like just what's happening right below our feet. These beautiful just creations of, and I'm sure you know, because this is your research and this is what you do, but just like this idea that can just occur in nature, and these beautiful compilations and compositions, just, I don't know. Like you said, it's one of those things where you end up in choice paralysis because it's all so beautiful and you want it all. And I need to learn to appreciate versus thinking I need to own every beautiful stone I see.
It is definitely a challenge. I'm really spoiled lately. I recently started working for an earth science museum, and I'm the collection technician. So I'm in charge of like actually managing and inventorying the collection, which is a whole other conversation to be had. But I get to open a box of mystery minerals that hasn't been stored properly in 50 years and unwrap each one and go, oh wow. Oh, wow. Oh my goodness. So, and then none of them are allowed to come home with me. So it's great. My banker god is grateful that I get the kind of aesthetic and energetic satisfaction from it, but I don't actually have to buy one.
So how many is too many? Like, so for just the regular person out there who's getting into it, like, I don't know, like for me, I feel like there's just so many minerals out there. There's so many awesome things that you can buy. Like, I don't know, is there a few like specific ones that you would focus on? I guess it maybe depends on what you're using it for, right?
Yeah, bingo. So, my general rule of thumb when I get asked these kinds of questions is, rather than try to come up with a very prescriptive list and make everyone fit that list or make that list fit everyone, because it's impossible. We're all different. We have different energetic needs, different social and emotional needs. We got different spiritual needs, let alone all the material stuff happening. So I think a good place to get started is what gets you excited. Either because you read about it in a book and it fits what you're going through perfectly, or because you saw it in the shop and you can't live without it. One of my mentors, the greatest piece of advice she ever gave me was, it's always the crystals you don't buy that you regret the most. And I can attest to that being true. So an exercise that I will play with myself if I'm trying to figure out, do I really need all of these things, is, well, if I didn't buy any today and I came back tomorrow, which would I be really mad if it sold? And so like that's one of my like little litmus tests. But when it comes to choosing things for our own individual toolboxes, find things that resonate with you deeply. either because you love the way they look or the way they feel, or because they match, the textbook definition matches what you're going through. But then also ensure that you've got a few other things just to have a well-rounded kit. Having some grounding stones, having some protective stones, having some purifying stones, having some stones that maybe help you feel emotionally centered, just so that way on any given day you can turn to the tool that's going to help you the most, because our needs change, our moods change, our world is in a constant state of change. So it's always nice to have just even if it's just a handful, as long as they are diverse enough, you're going to be covered no matter what.
You had mentioned that when you were entering this world of minerals and the folklore and the science and everything beautiful in between, that there wasn't a lot in your language, right? You hadn't quite built up the language to associate what you were encountering as you were first entering into this. Do you find, because you did do so much of that research and you're, writing books and really educating people in this field, that you're assisting in creating that vocabulary?
I think part of it was, at 8 years old, you in a small town in southeastern Florida, there was no metaphysical store. There was no spiritual section in our local library. There wasn't much of a geology section in our local library because, Florida's not exactly famous for its rocks and minerals. Limestone and agatized coral, and that's like the end of our list that people can name. So it was really about having the raw experience and maybe not knowing that other people went through similar things. But as an adolescent, I kind of sampled from the buffet of world religions. I mentioned that I didn't grow up in a particularly religious household. So nobody taught me what I needed to believe or ought to believe, which was a blessing and a curse. I was kind of the weird guy at school, but it also meant that I could read about Buddhism or read about witchcraft and paganism, read about historic practices that aren't around today. And one of the things that I've always found fascinating is, without being too much of a universalist these days, finding common threads, common narratives. The human experience is the human experience. No matter when or where people live, they're still people. And so I think that can also be said of the more than human world. A spirit is a spirit is a spirit. Yes, they come in a lot of different sizes and shapes and personalities, and they are informed by the cultures with which they've interacted, but they're still there. We can still tap into the same kind of potential. So once I kind of, I'll say, filled my toolbox with more than just rock related things, I started to build that language. I really started to understand. And, I think a lot of like modern crystal healing literature is very sensationalized. It's all high vibe this and, transmute that. And I'm not saying any of that is wrong, but we also have to remember that this is an art, not a science. And particularly when we are not informing that art by the material body, the composition, the structure, the formation process, all the other things that we can kind of ground and tether these ideas to, then we're really just at the level of personal interpretation, personal gnosis. That's not a bad thing, but it also means mileage is going to vary. So my individual experience with any given rock or mineral might look different to someone else's until we start to examine the reason why we're having these experiences. So like my big thing over definitely the last decade or so, but even kind of leading up to that, has been trying to get at, why do so many people have this kind of experience with citrine or rhodonite or calcite or sodalite? Why do these two people say such radically different things working with the same material? What is similar about these? So I really pride myself at taking time to kind of unravel that and see what's underneath the surface, because at the end of the day, the same kind of energetic mechanism, the same therapeutic action when applied to two different systems is going to yield different surface level results, because my baggage looks different to someone else's. But if I understand my baggage well enough and how that energy, that crystal, is interfacing with it, then we can probably anticipate how the same energy is going to interface with someone else's baggage.
I say this loosely. A lot of crystal books or books about crystal healing tend to give you guidance on like cleansing and protection and a little bit more of, like you said, the kind of high vibration topics, but your book also includes curses, bindings, hauntings, and those you don't tend to find within the crystal healing books. Now, when we talk about crystals, when it comes to curses, bindings, hauntings, and those kind of topics, what exactly are you referencing?
So, the world is not always warm and fuzzy. And I think a lot of crystal books operate from the perspective that what people want to get out of life is the warm and fuzzy. And in a perfect world, yeah, I mean, give me rainbows and sunshine and, cute puppies and a warm mug of tea, and that'll be a great day. But sometimes life sucks. Sometimes there are observable, like really mundane reasons why, and sometimes there are a little bit more weird reasons why. And if we never address the elephant in the room, then we're going to be woefully underprepared when we face those things. So I started writing this book in 2019. I'd finished what would become my most popular book, my bestseller, called Crystal Basics. And in 2020, when that other book came out, I had originally planned like a big tour, and I was gonna, go promote it. And we all know what happened in 2020. I don't have to say it out loud. That tour never happened. And the needs of my community, the needs of the folks that I was helping here in kind of the local level at my local metaphysical bookstore, my local occult shop, as well as like the other kind of community platforms, which mostly shifted to online spaces for a while. What people were experiencing was a lot more urgent, was a lot more big, was a lot more terrifying for a lot of folks, of all kinds of different backgrounds and identities and lived experiences. And I think if I'd hurried up and finished writing what would become Crystals for Psychic Self-Defense, like as soon as I finished putting pen to paper on Crystal Basics and got it done before the end of 2019, it would have been a very different book. But, over the course of these years, it took me about 5 years to finish this project. I famously wrote a book in 27 days once. So 5 years is like painstakingly slow for me. I actually wrote 2 other books and released them in the process of writing this one. I had a lot of my own stuff to go through, and a lot of it wasn't fun. It wasn't easy. A lot of it was pretty mundane. But some of it wasn't. And the needs of those around me, people were coming in to the shop when I wasn't traveling. I could at least be of service there. And, their needs, we couldn't answer with a simple fix. It's, if someone is really going through the big, heavy stuff, we can't just sprinkle a little salt on it, light some sage, and call it a day. And to pretend that is adequate in cases where we are dealing with maybe more malefic forces of the socio-political variety or of the magical metaphysical variety, it doesn't matter. But like, if we're going to understand that those things exist in our world, then we need to have tools to meet them. So some of the other kind of books about crystals for protection that are out there are actually written by folks that I love, people that I know. One of my now dearly departed friends and colleagues wrote a couple really brilliant ones. And I just wanted to carry the baton further. I wanted to talk about things that were absent in some of those other works, while also paying homage to the folks who did it first. So yeah, I wanted to ensure that if someone is facing some pretty heavy spiritual circumstances, there are equally heavy tools. If we think we're cursed, or whether we only think we are, or whether we actually are, oftentimes the remedy is the same. So knowing how counter curses work, knowing how counter magic works is important. If someone is taking away from our own autonomy, our own agency, then knowing how to bind their influence so we can reclaim our power and maybe have room to breathe, that's a really important skill set to have, magically speaking. And sometimes the best way to mitigate harm is to send it right back. The kitchen brings the wrong meal to your table. It's not personal. You just go, actually, I didn't order this. It's got to go back to the kitchen. And if my personal ethos are kind of centered around harm reduction, if we're always coming from that space of harm reduction, then as long as we match the skill set, the practice to the circumstance, then we are net positive in the world. We're making the world a better place if we're reducing the amount of harm. being perpetuated in it. So that's why I included those things. Of course, the hope is nobody needs to know how to do a crystal curse or bind someone's power or deal with spirits and hauntings. But truth be told, some people are going to need that.
I think that's absolutely powerful. I mean, you're right. When we talk about crystals, oftentimes it is focused on self-healing to an extent that's phenomenal, but there are things out there that exist beyond that, right? And I feel like oftentimes, and I could be wrong, but I feel like oftentimes we feel powerless if it's like, I feel like I'm being psychically attacked. I feel like there is a curse potentially being, brought at me, or there's energy negative. I don't know where it's coming from, but I need it to stop. Oftentimes the literature or anything out there is like, well, you have to know the source to stop it. But it sounds like, with what you've written, you're kind of putting the agency back in our hands so that it's like, you maybe don't need to know who it's coming from. You just need to believe or know that that is happening to you.
Discernment goes a long way in a situation like this. If we sensationalize things in a bad way, it's just as ineffective as if we sensationalize the good stuff to the point of no return. So yeah, in a perfect world, if we actually know that someone is performing some kind of psychic harm, some action that is influencing our lives, if we can identify that, there are mitigations that we can enact. But the truth is we don't always know that. On the flip side, especially people who are kind of new to the woo-woo, the magical world, which is the most exciting phase in anyone's journey. So I don't want to make it sound like that's a bad thing. Like, I love working with beginners because everything is new and learning is like the most fun part of me. So like, if I could go back and be a beginner again, I would do it. But when you find the folks who are like, oh goodness, I need help. I think I've been cursed. I'm like, okay, let's do something about that. Tell me more. And, they explain the things happening in their life. And it just sounds like kind of ordinary bad luck, which is the thing that also happens. Like, I hate to say it, but not everything happens for a reason. Or maybe said a better way, sometimes the reason is really boring. Like, the reason everything went wrong this morning is because you forgot to set your alarm, not because someone cursed you. The reason you feel icky is because the trees are blooming right now and you're allergic to the pollen. Like, there doesn't have to be a deeper spiritual interpretation to everything. And I think the metaphysical world at large tries to find too much meaning in things, which also takes agency away from us, because then there's always a reason and I have no control over that reason. But, going back to our beginner, we go through the things, it's kind of ordinary bad luck. Then we go, okay, so, maybe one or two of these things are red flags. So let's talk about where this could be coming from. Who do we think could be sending this? I genuinely don't know. What other practitioners do you know? Oh, actually, I'm brand new. I've never met a single practitioner except for the people who work in the store. I'm like, well, I promise we're not doing it. So what is the likelihood that some stranger who's never met you, who doesn't know you, doesn't know that you're practicing, who has no investment in your life, what is the chance that there is a curse? But I have good news for you. Whether you actually are or it's in your head, the remedy is the same. So let's talk about ways that we can break through this, because those spells we cast on ourselves, the things that we create through worry, fear, doubt, feelings of inadequacy, they are just as real and far more frequent than outside sources of psychic harm.
So you did say, you're connecting with the metaphysical, and my big question is, when you first, you've always had this passion for stones and gems and everything, but bridging that gap to the metaphysical to actually see where it's harming people or where, it's affecting people's lives. Like, I guess my question is, how did you get into that? Or was there a story? Was there an event that happened in your life that was like, oh my God, like, not only do these minerals and everything like matter, but they're crucial to a lot of people's lives because of this and this that I've experienced?
I don't think there's a single story. I mean, for sure, I grew up a really sensitive person, like really sensitive in every meaning of that word. Later in life, people would, in the metaphysical scene, had lots of terms for that. Oh, you're psychic, you're an indigo child. You find a name, it probably got thrown at me at some point, and who cares? I'm just a human being, but like the normal human predisposition is to have a range of faculties, some of which are more materially focused, some of which are maybe a little bit more immaterially focused. So I've always been kind of tuned into stuff around me. And, I've been in places where there's pretty high frequency of some kind of paranormal phenomena. I've been in the graveyards at night as a college kid doing the ghost hunting thing on like very primitive digital cameras and capturing weird stuff. And crystals were a support I leaned on then. Stayed in haunted places, experienced the world as like an emotionally sensitive person. Crystals were something I could lean on for that as well, to find better boundaries. And then as an anxious neurodivergent person, just seeing the benefit of how these energetic tools, these also they work on the symbolic and metaphorical level too. Like even if we don't have the buy-in for the energy side of it, they have long-standing cultural traditions of imparting meaning to our lives. So seeing all of these things has certainly been part of it. But the reason I wanted to write a book like this is because in part I needed to work on some of my boundaries in a social sense, but also in an energetic sense. When you're in the public sphere, there's stuff that comes with that spotlight, which we don't ask for, but it comes anyway. There were things that I had friends go through. I a really dear friend undergo some really severe psychic attack. And so we used a variety of tools, but the thing I'm an expert in is crystals. So that's what I wanted to concentrate the book on, and the bottom line is I know what tools work for me. I also know what tools get me excited. And that's like the intersection of things that I can spend time writing about. There are some phenomenal books on these kinds of topics, not specifically related to crystals, that are also wonderful tools. But like I'm not the expert in those things. So I'll buy those books and read them and point people to them or use them in this bibliography in the book I wrote. But rocks have always been a foundation for me, the bedrock, if you will, of my life. So that's why I wanted to, write a book like this.
Now, when it comes to crystals that we're using on a daily basis, or we're out in the world with the crystals, whether it's for protection or grounding or just comfort, do you recommend a specific way to have it with you, like on against your skin or in your pocket? Like, is there a way you recommend?
So I like to default to a model of crystal energy that is at least informed by electromagnetism. We can't actually prove that crystal energy is some kind of electromagnetism, but if that is a really wide spectrum of energies that behaves in predictable ways, presumably other energies must behave in similar ways. So using that kind of metaphor, if you will, to understand how energies can be generated by or directed by objects or vibrating systems is a big part of how I base the kind of practical. So if a crystal is in our energy field, because we have a massive electromagnetic field around us, there are also things we can't measure that permeate that same field, but maybe one day there'll be a device sensitive enough or not. Doesn't really matter to me. But if that crystal is in our electromagnetic field, we're interfacing with it in some way. So if it is convenient for us to wear it as a pendant, then wear it as a pendant. If it's convenient for us to have it around our wrist, then do that. If we're sitting at a desk all day, you can have it on your desk. If you want it in your pocket, in your purse, if you want to build a grid around your home, just whatever is going to be effective for your lifestyle, that's the best thing for you. I'm much less interested in universal superlatives than I am about finding what works for the individual. And I really like to demystify it as much as possible, because if it just needs to be touching my energy field to connect with me as a whole being, I don't have to worry about what finger it's on, what wrist it's on, which pocket I wear it in, how long it is around my neck. Now, are there additional layers of symbolism that we can add to this? Yes, but they're not necessarily universal energetic truths. They are just symbolic interpretations. So, the idea that our our dominant hand is a more projective energy versus our non-dominant hand is more receptive. That is a model that is true in some cultures and places, but not in others. So rather, if we're worried about, oh no, is this on the right wrist? Maybe instead we take a step back and go, is it on my person? Well, then it's working in some way. And then we can fine tune as we like. So, the book has diagrams for, the different kind of planetary correspondences of our finger. If we want that planetary influence in a protective gemstone we wear, we can look at models of the aura and chakras for like where we place things. We can look at all kinds of things, but I'd say like entry level is just get the thing and bring it into your life in the way that is easiest, most effective, and hopefully the most fun for you.
Yeah, I would say I've had some experiences. I actually I went to Scotland this year, and I went and just to do some paranormal investigations and everything. And one of the big things I wanted to do there is I wanted to get some gems. I wanted to have something on me. And I mentioned before, but the smoky quartz, that was one of the things that I put on me. And the crazy thing was when I had it on my left wrist, and I was walking through a museum, and a woman there was this 80-year-old woman. We were walking down these stairs, and she just like fell right in front of me, like hit her head, and she ended up being okay. But like I stayed with her and her husband. They were from another country. They only spoke Spanish, and so I just kind of it was good and it was weird, but it was also it was just one of those situations where it just felt like something there was something extra there. There was something extra there, and I switched it to my other hand because I was like, I don't want people to get hurt. I don't know if that was me, but it was literally like I just bought the thing and this just happens right in front of me. And then I met them. They were really awesome people. And then I met a couple other people, like all in the same like couple of hours. And it just felt more. It just felt more. And that's why for me, like the smoky quartz was something that I brought into me that I was just like, well, it's got to be something that that works somehow, and I don't know what it was.
I'm always careful about interpreting someone else's experience. I wasn't there. I can't tell you what it was because I wasn't there. I just don't have the data for it. But a common refrain that I use on a weekly basis is correlation is not causation. I wore this black t-shirt today. It did not rain. Did my black t-shirt give me sunny weather? They correlate, but they have no causal relationship. So can I say definitively that smoky quartz did or did not have an effect in that circumstance? No, I can't. But maybe it's not about the external causal factor, but about the way you were able to respond by having that thing to support you, having that extra energy to be present with you. That's the thing that I think of smoky quartz almost as like a warrior, a guardian. It's so grounding. It's nurturing in some ways. It's wise. So lucky that you could have that additional support in a moment when it was required of you, right?
Have you found there are minerals that don't play well together?
On their own, generally speaking, no. But there's another part of this equation we have to address. It's not the crystal to crystal conversation that is going to cancel each other out or, have any kind of influence like that. It's the human to crystal relationship. So how does it feel when we enter as part of that dynamic? And mixing stones, matching them, choosing how we work with them, which ones we like together, is deeply personal. We can be kind of prescriptive and say, hey, these things are kind of working on similar levels towards similar outcomes. They ought to work well together. And that may be true, unless for some reason you just don't jive with that. And it's a lot like combining flavors. If you love mint and you love chocolate, maybe chocolate mint is a great combo, but also maybe it isn't. Maybe you just can't stand the taste of mint chocolate chip ice cream. I think that's unfortunate for you because I think it's delightful. But I respect that there's some other flavor of ice cream, some other flavor combination that you're going to like better. So if I really, really love the combination of, let's just pick two things in front of me, fluorite and labradorite. They work really well in my space together. They're always here by the computer, maybe not always the same physical rocks, but I always have some representative of both of those species because of how they support my work. But the next person could go, I really love labradorite, but there's something about fluorite that I hate it. That's a bad combo for them. Or maybe we could say it's an ineffective combination for them right now. I often think that the crystals that don't feel comfortable for us typically hold some of the deepest life lessons, or can point us towards some of the deepest life lessons we have yet to integrate. But that doesn't mean we have to buy a 10-pound example of it and carry it around all day.
That's me and Tiger's Eye. I've never had an affinity towards that. And I'm going to have to accept, for one, the blue Tiger's Eye. But I'm going to have to, I like the way you said that. I'm going to have to deep dive and see, why do I not connect with that one?
Yeah, I've got one. It's rhodochrosite. Rhodochrosite is a kind of distant relative called rhodonite, which is one of my favorite mineral species. I love to collect it from all over the world. I've got, a big gemmy piece right here beside me. It's usually on my person if I leave the house, but there's something about rhodochrosite. You just take that silicate base and substitute it for a carbonate base, and it's beautiful to look at. I own some pieces. You cannot convince me to wear it all week long. Every now and then I'll go, I'm going to wear that rhodochrosite bracelet today, almost never by itself. I have one really, really high quality strand of beads of it that I will wear for short bits for specific purposes, but we're just not friends for the long term. I understand its therapeutic benefits. I also understand which ones I probably need more of. I'm just not ready to do that work yet.
See, and I haven't done the work at all to even understand the benefits for Tiger's Eye. I just know I've always had an aversion to it. So I'll have to look it up in the book and see, what is it that I am maybe within myself not acknowledging?
Yeah, and that's the great thing about crystals. They reflect to us those parts of the psyche that we often overlook. It's not so much about the crystals doing the work for us. Crystals are energetic catalysts, and a catalyst lowers the amount of effort or energy required to achieve a particular outcome. It's like a nicer gym membership, right? We can get our bodies in shape without the gym membership. We can go to the crummy discount gym and still get some great work done. We can also go to the really swanky one that has all the best equipment. Having the gym membership, owning the crystal, doesn't change your life. It's showing up and doing the work. The crystal makes doing that work easier by spotlighting and foregrounding the things that we might need the most work on, or could benefit from working on first, or maybe by reminding us which things we do a little too much work on and need to calm it down.
I did have one question about, you were getting into, when we first started, we were going to talk about how the gems and everything help protect you, right? What specifically does a gem or stone crystal do to protect your energy field? And how does, specifically in a paranormal sense, for somebody like me, who I'm going actually on a paranormal investigation this weekend, what can I use and how can that help me specifically?
Well, it's a big topic. So we're going to paint in broad strokes first, and then kind of funnel down to a couple of specifics at least. If we go back to this metaphor of crystals and their relationship to electromagnetism, to light, visible light is, a tiny piece of that big spectrum. One of the things that we see that crystals do is that they cohere or harmonize energy fields. Our makeup is decidedly less organized in a material sense than a crystal. A crystal, not just a mineral, but anything with a crystalline composition structure, is a solid substance that has a regular composition. It's always the same ingredients throughout, and a repeating symmetrical structure. So those ingredients are always put together in the same shape over and over again to fill the available space. And when things are made out of such rhythmic and regular structures, they have similarly rhythmic and regular energy fields. Our liver is made out of different stuff than our kidneys is made out of different stuff than our eyelids and our hair and our toenails, right? So we are made out of a much less coherent field. There are some studies that show that when our EEG and EKG are the electromagnetic field of the brain and the heart, respectively, when they sync up, when they are enharmonic to one another, and they get this level of coherence, we experience things like the studies use words like positive mental affect, we feel better. It's also tends to be a hallmark of better like physiological health. So we know that if our energy fields are more chaotic, we feel worse. And if they're more organized, we feel better. Furthermore, a more organized field is, we'll say, less permeable to outside influences. So if I introduce any crystalline body to my field begins to model itself after that over time through a process called entrainment. I begin to sync up with it. As I become more coherent, as my energy field becomes more structured, there's less of a chance of there being, little chinks in the armor that stuff can get through. My natural defenses, my natural psychic self-defense can just do its job more effectively. Then we can also add to that like the symbolic layer. Stone is enduring. My soft, squishy body is not. So people have used the materiality as well as the symbolism of stone for protection, for defense. Think of the early forts built out of rock, early shelters dug out of cliff faces, stone tools and projectiles. This is how we kept ourselves safe. This is how we allowed life to exist. This is how we eventually civilized ourselves and some of the world around us, at least. And stone remembers that, but we don't. So we've got, the kind of energetic, we have the symbolic, and then even more than that, we have these folkloric traditions where some stones have always thought to be somehow more protective, more nurturing, more enduring than others. So in situations where we might be encountering some intense situations, some big vibes or spirits or other things, there are definitely some crystals I think that are good kind of general all-purpose protectors. We can think of our good grounding stones, smoky quartz and a lot of jaspers and black tourmaline and shungite and obsidian. But there are some stones that have really specific traditional or kind of neo-traditional associations with protection from spirits and similar kind of stuff. So some of those are things like jet and amber, which have been in use for tens of thousands of years, literally tens of thousands of years. More on that in my next book. They get a whole chapter together. But in like medieval manuscripts, you'll see instructions to like place powdered jet on burning coals, and the smoke of it will drive spirits away. You find that some stones like emerald are so imbued with this quality of light and illumination that they cast out darkness. We've got other things like sulfur. Sulfur is a native element, and when formed naturally, it is a mineral. I don't suggest that we go about burning it. It's kind of noxious. You shouldn't breathe that in. If you must, do it in a well-ventilated area and be safe, like use good fire safety rules always. But even just having a beautiful specimen of sulfur in the home is thought to kind of purge the energy field of the kind of astral creepy crawlies that we pick up in the world, whether they're sentient or not. There's this kind of scrubbing quality that it's got. And further, we do find crystals that are used for things like curse breaking and geopathic stress, the kind of phenomena that are related to earth energy. It's not so much about sentient spirits, but, the way the land is wired and the way we get kind of upset from the balance of that. And I've got a whole chapter in the book on dealing with spirits. It's got things, not just protection from them, but like spirit release. Like maybe our goal is to help things move on. So, of course, any of the ones that I've mentioned so far could also be great, but things like amethyst and adrian and some of the more unusual things that you're going to find like stibnite and tektite and sphalerite are things I've actually used in real life for these kinds of phenomena with usually good results.
What exactly is geopathic stress?
So geopathic is a word that comes from Greek, geos meaning of the earth, pathos means suffering. So like, empathy, suffering as if with someone, sympathy, same kind of idea. So geopathic stress is thought to be a kind of harmful effect that is generated by the Earth's energy there are natural places in the earth where like you just get fried if you spend too much time in them. There are also unnatural phenomena related to the earth where you can similarly get fried. So, some of this is naturally occurring. Some of it is because we've built and moved things and dug places and put telephone poles or, leveled mountains or whatever it might be. And it's not so much that this energy is inherently harmful. It's more like when you walk through the garden, your goal is not to crush every earthworm underneath your boots, but if one happens to be there, like just the impact of your life is disruptive for them. So sometimes the earth as one big organism, the impact of its life can affect us smaller beings. So geopathic stress is kind of related to a handful of other topics, things like sick building syndrome, which sometimes is thought to have a more kind of esoteric cause rather than a chemical or biological cause. We've got stuff like the kind of debated effects of certain kinds of electromagnetism and how they can influence living tissues and consciousness. Some folks are really worried about their Wi-Fi routers. I'm not especially. Maybe it's because of all the rocks in the house, but for folks who want to know more about that, there is some info on that in the book. The goal was to have a little bit of something for everybody's practice rather than just one set of tools for one kind of person.
Now, the inverse of that, can the stones affect the Wi-Fi in the house?
If so, I shouldn't be able to talk to you now. I'll put it that way. Unless the stones are falling off a shelf and knocking over the router, I think we're good.
Now, you mentioned minerals that have various properties, and across many different cultures and in different mythologies, even spiritual practices in the New Age, salt is a very strong protectant. And, they say healer and cleanser. I know that it's oftentimes take a salt bath or do, cleanse things with salt. So my question to you is, what is it about salt that makes it such a strong cleanser and purifier and protector?
I think salt is one of the most criminally underrated minerals in the crystal healer's toolbox. You find it among like magicians and occultists and witches and like their apothecary kit, but they don't always think of it in mineral terms. So the earliest salt production goes back, I think something like 8,000 years. I should know this off the top of my head because also in the next book, salt gets a whole chapter to itself. So the mineral we call salt is halite. So halite is sodium chloride. It's, NaCl. We all know that formula. We all learned it in, middle school, high school chemistry. But what we get is this essentially neutral compound that is formed by a reaction between something that is acidic and something that is alkaline. So on a chemical level, things that are classified as salts undergo that same kind of reaction to form. They're taking things that are otherwise antithetical to one another and joining them in such a way that neutralizes their antipathy. We also see, so energetically, we use salt to do something similar. It becomes this mediator, this moderator. If we look at its crystal system, perfect salt crystals typically form cubes or some variation on that. They can have like sunken in and etched skeletal faces, but in a perfect world with no interruptions from their environment, they'll form perfect little blocks, sometimes several feet wide in some instances that we've found in some pretty unusual places around the earth. And that symbol of the cube is one of structure. So in the cubic crystal system, we have these three equal axes that all meet at right angles. There is more order and symmetry in this type of crystal form than in any other crystal form. So things like fluorite and garnet and pyrite and galena are going to form in the same kind of crystal system and similarly exert this very grounding, stabilizing influence. Think of building blocks. You can line them up and make a very stable structure to protect you. But more than that, it's kind of the other ways that salt influences its environment. It dehydrates things. It breaks down the stuff that makes us sick. We talk about preserving foods, and when that is done with salt, historically we call that curing them. Of course, we also talk about healing, and that is curing as well. And it is the removal of something's ability to cause us harm. So salt is the life preserver because it cures us of the things psychically, psychologically, magically that ail us, and therefore is a really powerful ally to work with. Now, it's hard to wear as jewelry. It's soluble. You can't sweat on it. You don't want to put it in your drinking water or you won't enjoy the taste of it. So, we have to find other ways to work with salt, but you could take a pouch of ordinary salt. It doesn't have to be some exotic rock salt from some other location, although that's great if you've got it. But you could carry a pouch of it. You can sprinkle it places. You can make a dish of it. Maybe add some other crystals that won't be harmed by the salt, or some herbs or essential oils, and let this be a centerpiece in your home to cleanse and reinvigorate and transform the energies, to offer some kind of protection. You can get really creative with that. This book has like a sulfur and salt exorcism spell in it, as well as a salt and crystal like a cleansing protection ritual for the home. Salt is one of the 145 crystals in the directory. But the next book coming out in the fall is going to have a lot more to say about salt, something like, 5,000 or 6,000 words about it.
How did you come about finding an exorcism ritual to incorporate salt and sulfur? Is this something that you came across with like the cultural studies?
So, both of those are substances that we find in these kinds of practices. Now, the ritual that's in this particular book, Crystals for Psychic Self-Defense, is my own. I wrote it. I'm a practicing occultist, among other things. So if we know the elements of symbolism and ritual design, if we know the correspondences in our materials, we can write rituals. So some of the things in this book are inspired by some historic practices. Others are, definitely my own innovations, because we can do that in this world. So that particular sulfur and salt exorcism is definitely unique, but there are some things like there are instructions for making a kind of binding spell that closely resembles the curse tablets we find in the kind of Greco-Roman, Hellenic worlds and beyond. We typically think of them being written in lead or sometimes more precious metals, but also, like from the island of Cyprus, we have dozens of examples that have been found that are in selenite, a crystal most people would not associate with cursing or binding, but historically it's for thousands of years that precedent has been there. There are some other, things that clearly sampled from or informed by folklore and traditional practice, but are definitely a modern take on it. And that was the goal here. I wanted to make things that were new and fresh and fit in this world, because we're not all going to have access to the things that people did 1,000 years ago. And just because people did it 1,000 years ago doesn't mean it's better or smarter. It's just older.
Are there any crystals that you recommend for the bedroom? Like BJ and I are very much dream influenced, lucid dreamers, but I also tend to I feel like for me personally, my energetic guards come down when I'm asleep. Like they just completely disappear, which is, something I probably need tiger's eye for. No, I'm just kidding. Is there anything that you recommend to people to protect the sleep space and the dream space?
Yeah, that's a really great point. No amount of personal protection we do during the day is necessarily going to keep up the momentum when we're no longer conscious to reinforce it. So having some sort of environmental protection, some sort of ambient energy to envelop us in our home space, whether we're asleep or awake, is good, but extra attention should be given to the bedroom because we are in a vulnerable state. It's the metaphor of, if we want to protect ourselves during sleep, we can put on like the suit of armor and climb into bed, but if we didn't lock the front door, it doesn't really matter. People are getting in anyway, right? It's going to disturb us. So we've got to have more than one layer of protection here. So there are some really like easy things we can do that are just kind of general home warding. There's a lot about this in the book. There's a lot of different like grids and things that we can apply to the home, but think of it this way. We want something that is anchoring, stabilizing, good at deflecting or releasing energies. So that could be maybe black tourmaline or a common stone like flint or granite. You could use hematite or smoky quartz. I find an influence like this in the main corners of your home, supposing it's square-ish, rectangular-ish, that would be a good option for you. If it is another shape, then just however many points you need for that to make sense, I will let people figure out what that means. And it can be just inside one room, the four corners of a room, or it could be the four corners at the far extent of your property, whatever also makes the most amount of sense for you. And then, maybe partner that with something more uplifting. So we've got our like anchors, the downers, if you will, energetically. So we need some uppers in there too, something that's also uplifting. So maybe that's selenite. Maybe that is something like amethyst. Maybe that's our warm and fuzzy stones like rose quartz. And these are, the kinds of things we can partner together for just very general energetic health in our space, but for that sleep component in particular. Historically, we find things like jet and amethyst and holy stones or hagstones, which are just natural rocks with holes in them, being associated with protection from nightmares and unpleasant dreams or things that go bump in the night. We've got some stones like sugilite and jade that have associations with imparting pleasant dreams. I find I have a special affinity for this stone, but I also find it is a generally good stone to have in the bedroom. That is rhodonite, because rhodonite is really stabilizing to our emotional body. And I'm the kind of high-strung, tightly wound person that the moment I hit the bed, all of a sudden the inertia of the day catches up with me, and I got to get my mind to quiet down. So the kind of energy that rhodonite brings is almost like a comforter, big ol' blanket of energy it wraps me in that just helps me feel comfortable and less worried about what I'm bringing into the bed, because I can just come to that tomorrow morning when there's space for it. So finding the mix that works for us is important. If we are not fond of tiger's eye, it's probably not the right stone for the bedroom. If we absolutely love amethyst, but it makes us feel loopy and high, also maybe not the ideal stone for the bedroom if we want pleasant sleep throughout. There are definitely stones we can work with to enhance our kind of lucid dream experience. Jade is one we find. It was called the dream stone in several languages in different hemispheres of the world, so it's definitely got a long-standing tradition. But prehnite is one that some people work with. That is one that can help us with dream recall. We can work with just good old-fashioned clear quartz of many varieties, particularly the little brightly double terminated crystals from New York that are called Herkimer diamonds. They're thought to be really good for enhancing dream work of all kinds. But I think it's helpful to just remember we neither want something that totally dulls us nor overstimulates us. One makes our dreams less productive, the other makes it harder to stay asleep. So a happy medium is good, or a partnership between the two. So if we find those like really high vibe, high consciousness stones overstimulating for bed, partner it with a grounding stone, a more nourishing stone, and vice versa.
So jade and tourmaline.
Could be a great combo, yeah.
I did have one question. You have talked a lot about like protection and things to help you with that. Is there something that you can use maybe to enhance, right? If you wanted to specifically connect with spirits, is there something that you could use to help that? Or again, like with dreams, you said that there's things that can help enhance your dreams, right?
Yeah, so if we want to like encourage spirit communication, there are a few things that we could look towards, depending on like, without getting too far into it, we all are wired a little bit differently to perceive things differently. Some of us are more auditory, some are more visual, some work on an inner knowing. Some of us are just full-blown mediums that can see dead people and talk to them. Others kind of work more in the symbolic, metaphorical realm. That one's me. So it's about identifying your strength and finding something that complements it. In a really broad setting, I find that the combination of amber and jet is great for working with spirits. It is protective without being over insulative. We tend to not take things on, but we also aren't closed off so much that we're not going to make contact. We could look at good old-fashioned quartz because it heightens all of our, we'll say, modes of perception. There is a particular variety of quartz that occurs, and it has some sort of change in its environment as it grows. And sometimes that's the introduction of other minerals, sometimes just a change in the rate at which it grows. And so it retains this kind of imprint of what it used to look like inside. We call those phantom crystals because it looks like a wispy ghost of what the crystal was inside it. Appropriately enough, they're great for spirit communication. They're also really good for dealing with spirits we'd rather not have in a place. So like we can direct its energy up as appropriate. You'll find a lot of varieties of smoky quartz that will have phantoms in them as well. So if you find a nice smoky phantom, maybe since you've got an affinity for that stone, it could be a good place to turn to. And one of those stones that also sorely underrated, but really good for connecting with the spirit world at large is good old-fashioned flint. It's not a sexy crystal or gemstone. It's a common sedimentary rock. Hominids, long before Homo sapiens walked the earth, used flint for ritual and ceremony, connected it to the other world, the abodes of the spirits, the ancestors, the gods. Flint is a wayshore, a door opener, an anchor, so we can make those journeys with grace and return safely afterwards. So I think flint is a really good option, and it's one that will break the bank.
Is there a frequency that you recommend of cleansing your personal protection crystals, or crystals you tend to interact with quite consistently?
The short answer is more often than you think you need to. If I'm working with a stone, if I'm wearing a stone throughout the day, it gets a gentle cleansing at the end of the day, and then probably a more intensive one as often as I have the bandwidth for it. I'd like to say once a week, but I know there are some weeks I forget or skip it or just defer it until later. And how exactly we cleanse is going to depend on the stone and the situation. You know, if we're in a situation where we can burn things and we like smoke, use, sacred smoke to cleanse your plants. If that's not effective for you, like, Cheryl in the office is going to be really mad if you accidentally set the cubicle on fire trying to light up some sage. Maybe don't do that. Maybe bringing in the big Tibetan bowl or gong is going to be disruptive in the office. So we have to find other methods, but we can cleanse with water, with breath, with light, with sound, with other kinds of tools as well. So the book has lots of if-then statements for us, particularly when we're working in the realm of the less pleasant, whether it's, curses, psychic attacks, spirit attachments, and the like. There's some deeper cleanses, so long as it is safe for the physical properties of the crystal. We can do clay and water cleanses. We can bury things in the earth. We can use salt, but some things are fragile. They can be scratched or dehydrated by salt. Some things can be influenced by water. Some are too porous for clay. So we just need to look up that information. And there's some guidelines in this book. My big one, Crystal Basics, also has some good if-then statements about what to look for when it comes to cleansing crystals, so we don't accidentally make our amethyst fade on a sunny windowsill or try to rinse our halite under running water and then we don't have a piece of halite anymore. It's a real thing that's happened. Someone came to me, hey, this weird thing happened. Someone gave me a crystal. I thought it was a rose quartz heart. And I wanted to cleanse it before I worked with it. I'm like, good for you. That's a really good impulse to have. And then she takes out her phone and shows me the picture of very murky pinkish water. It's like, it dissolved. What was wrong with my rose quartz? I'm like, oh, I know the answer. It was pink salt. So apart from just knowing that the method we're choosing is safe, finding a rhythm that works for you. Not very many people come into my office. It's me and my husband. On a rare instance, we have company. Chances are we've handpicked that company. I'm not worried about their energy in my space. I'm probably more worried about how my energy shows up to them than theirs to me. But if our home was seeing a lot of action, I'd feel differently about it. In the occult store when I work there, we cleanse by smoke at least once every single day because we want to create a sense of spiritual hygiene for all of the guests who come through. Not because we're necessarily worried or afraid of people's vibes, but just because when our hands are dirty, we wash them. There's no moral attachment to that. When we soil our clothes, we toss them in the dryer. It's not because that dirt is bad philosophically. It's just not where we want it. So if we start to think about energy hygiene in the same sense, it's not about good vibes versus bad vibes. It's, are these vibes what I'm aiming for? Or did it just pick up something? And if you wore it, it picked up something. And chances are it picked it up from you.
With stones, I tend to be a bit intuitive. Okay, that's an understatement. I tend to be intuitive driven when I am out in the world picking stones. I like to hold them and see, what speaks to me, what connects with me. But there have been a few instances where I, go to touch a stone and it feels like needles are piercing my hand. And for me, I'm just like, ooh. I've always associated that with a negative attachment on the stone, but I'm kind of curious if, in your opinion, could it potentially be just me not connecting with that stone? Like my body's reaction not connecting with the stone versus my assumption having been there's something negative attached.
It could mean a variety of things. And because we all perceive and interpret slightly differently, I can't tell you what it means for you, but I can talk about what it means generally, to different people. It could be we're perceiving some sort of external energy that it's holding on to. Crystals are like little tape recorders. They remember all the energies they come in contact with until we wipe the tape clean. So it's not about good or bad, just is that energy aligned with me? Does it match the purpose? So sometimes the answer is no. Could it be a harmful or malevolent force? Yes, but statistically speaking, this is much less frequent. It could also be that crystal and we don't see eye to eye. That's not a morally good thing or a bad thing either. Rhodonite and I, great friends, rhodochrosite and I, just the thought of having to wear it all day makes me feel a little nauseated, even though it's beautiful. I appreciate it. I buy it because I love it intellectually. But I know that we could have a really good therapeutic relationship when I'm ready to sit down and do the work. There are some other stones I just feel ambivalent about. I get them because they're fun or I want to write about them, not because they excite me or repulse me. And sometimes we just meet rocks that aren't meant for us. As much as I would love to say that we can be friends with every crystal, we can't be friends with every person. And if we begin to view the world as inherently inspirited, as if there is an indwelling consciousness or force or spirit in all parts of the universe, then of course that's also true of our crystals. It is statistically unlikely that I'm going to be friends with every spirit that I meet. Most just don't care about humans. Stone spirits, plant spirits, other spirits, they're just not invested in us because we haven't taken the time to build the relationship. So sometimes that prickly sensation is we're just out of sync. There's no good, there's no bad, there's no repulsion, we're just out of sync. So those kinds of feelings could mean a lot of different things to different circumstances. And it's great to identify that it has meaning for you. And sometimes the only way to know definitively is to pick the wrong thing on purpose and see what happens.
Oh.
I'm not suggesting we make that our life's mission. I'm not suggesting you go, oh, this piece of sodalite feels disgusting when I pick it up. Well, let me buy it and work with it around the clock. Maybe what we do is we spend 5 minutes with it and observe how we feel before and after, and then we cleanse ourselves and the crystal. And then we go find the thing that is like our favorite crystal to kind of offset that. I went through a phase where like intellectually I was really enamored with lapis lazuli. And so I treated myself to some really, really nice lapis. And the moment I got it, like we were not on the same wavelength. I thought I was having a good time. Other people were really worried about me because they just said I was so monotone. There was like no energy to me whatsoever. And at the time I worked in corporate America and like a high-paced like luxury sales environment. So like I needed to be high energy and I was saying all the right things, but they were lackluster. And there was just something about the way we connected that was doing something for me. And although long-term it was positive, that wasn't the right place for it. I took it off and 15 minutes later, everyone's like, oh, did you go have a snack? You seem so much better. Was it your blood sugar? And I'm like, that must have been it.
Yeah, that was
sure. That's what we're going to go with because that's the least disruptive conversation we can have right now.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, the very few rare times that has occurred, it wasn't a specific stone type. I do feel it was just that individual stone. And for me, I attributed it to either someone who handled it before me or just had left an energy on it that I didn't care to keep holding. But, maybe I'll live life on the wild side and just buy the next one that does that. See what happens.
Yeah. And a great experiment is just cleanse it the moment you get it home and see if it feels the same.
Yeah. I'm going to give it a go. And I'll let you know. I'll be like, oh, nope, still needles. I gave it away. I buried it in the...
It's a great way to experiment.
Yeah, I like it.
I guess I do have just one more question. So when you do go shopping for these stones and all these crystals, is there a way that you know, like, what you're buying? Is it just, I mean, it's a big question, right? Like if you go to a store and you're like, hey, is this real? Is this not real? I guess it's stone. Is there a way to be like, some stores to avoid, some stores to like, that are more reputable that you would recommend?
So this is a big can of worms to open, and it's one I'm passionate about, but it is complicated. There's a lot of nuance here. I'm privileged to have a background in earth science, working in the rock and mineral field, and prior and kind of after that, like sourcing things for the metaphysical world, for the retail space. So like I see how this market works. I have the ability to look at most things and go, oh yeah, this has been treated, this has been dyed, this has been irradiated, this is not a real rock. But we don't always know those things. And the parameters for what makes an authentic, high quality piece of amethyst are different to the parameters for malachite or moldavite or citrine. So it's hard to give a series of if-then statements that are universally applicable, but instead, here's what we can do on a higher level. Find honest businesses. Find people who will tell you, oh, well, that's artificial. This has been heat treated. This has been dyed. I genuinely think most of these kind of shops are just doing the best they can with the tools they've got, but quite frankly, they haven't tried to get better tools. They haven't tried to learn the earth science behind it. They haven't learned how to ask the right questions of suppliers, and or they're responding to the demands of the market. The market loves the dyed stuff, the sparkly stuff, the coated stuff, the things that are not legit. Unfortunately, they're so popular that they will proliferate well into the future, and this is not a new problem. In some research I've done over the last couple of years, I've been looking at like apothecarist manuals from the early modern period, because lithotherapy, gem therapy was a big wing of traditional medicine. And these books written for folks who had to know how to create preparations from gemstones, they have very lucid descriptions of what an authentic zircon or amethyst or amber looks like, as opposed to the ones that are inauthentic. And oftentimes what they write is wildly inaccurate. But it was the best they could do at that time, because the science of modern geology didn't exist yet. But the idea that there have been counterfeits and treatments is not a new one. So ask sincere, open-ended questions. We don't go in saying, are all of your crystals real? We go in and say, hey, I'm really interested in things that haven't been treated. Could you point out some things that maybe have gotten some treatments? So I'll notice steer away from those. Or there's a specific thing you want, like I want natural citrine as opposed to heat treated citrine. Do you have any of that? And just see what they happen to say. And this also kind of dovetails with the conversation about the ethics of the crystal market, which is also complex and nuanced. It's not just how do we know this is a real thing, but how do we know that the way in which it was acquired didn't harm people or the earth? And the truth is, like, to get heavy for a minute here, we live in capitalism. When we extract things, we are exploiting people's labor and we are exploiting our natural resources. So everything causes some level of harm. Sometimes it's teeny tiny. Sometimes it's really big. I can assure you that the majority of our crystals represent only the smallest amount, the teeniest fraction of harm that is enacted by the mining and extraction industries at large. Our devices, our cosmetics, our transportation, our buildings, everything else is enacting way more harm by volume, but that doesn't give us a get out of jail free card. It doesn't mean we don't have to have the conversation. It just means that if there are folks trying to hold the crystal market to this impossible ideal, maybe the conversation should be bigger and include all these other things. So that's another case where we don't just go in and say, hey, are all of your crystals ethically sourced? Because that is a term that doesn't mean anything. It is arbitrary, and anyone can say yes or no, because anyone can decide what is ethical to them or not. So instead we say, I'm really interested in crystals that have low impact mining, or crystals that are mined by people who are paid fair wages, or things that are mined domestically because our own laws maybe are more proactive, for the time being at least, than some other regions. So could you point me in some of those directions? And those are concrete things that aren't the big yes or no question, because the big yes or no question is so hard. Like, are all of your crystals legit? But what does that mean? So the practical way that we can become educated. This is good homework I'm going to give everyone. It is optional. I won't grade it. If you want to know how to identify things that are not for real, if you get the chance to visit a crystal store, your local gem and mineral show, a big trade show, seek out the things that are not real. Tell people you're looking for lab-grown quartz, or you want to find reconstituted amber, and then go find the real thing as well. Because when you pick up that piece of resin that's pretending to be malachite, and in the other hand you hold a genuine piece of malachite, the weight alone, with your eyes closed, you would know which one was real. You get two spheres of identical proportions, and one of them feels like nothing, and the other is, well, a rock. So having that hands-on experience is invaluable. In the geology world, we often say the best geologist is not the one with the fanciest degree, who works in the best funded lab, who has the most up-to-date grant and the best equipment. The best geologist is just the one who's touched the most rocks. So that applies to us as well. Like, if we want to be savvy enough to know if something is what it purports to be, go see as many as you can.
Thank you. That answers it. It's a lot. It's definitely a complicated situation, and I appreciate you getting into it, because it is such a big thing. And obviously, never go online. Just go into the store, feel it, right? Especially if you're dealing with the metaphysical aspects of it.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. There are great retailers online. There are terrible retailers online. There are great retailers in person. There are terrible retailers in person. And oftentimes people are only doing their best. And my best looks different than some other people's. And it's okay to recognize that. It's okay for me to go into a shop that is just filled with nothing but, dyed touristy stuff, all polished by hand, probably with terrible labor practices overseas, and then still find that one beautiful mineral specimen, and I can identify its provenance on site and know that it is natural and go, I feel good about buying this one. So same with online. Like, as long as people are transparent, as long as they're willing to answer questions, I think it's worthwhile, but there is no substitute for feeling it out in person, especially in the beginning. It's also way more fun to see the thing you're getting when you get it.
I think it's important to remember, too, that we can take a note from, ancestors and other traditions that, yes, nothing is going to be ethically sourced, right? Like, there's some kind of harm being done, but there's also an element of gratitude that we can incorporate as we receive our stones, a gratitude to the earth, gratitude towards the energy that it's bringing us. And I think maybe that's really something important to remember to incorporate as we collect our specimens, is that element of gratitude.
Big time. And the conversations that we have about the nature of this market, the purpose of those conversations should never be to make someone feel bad for the crystals they've got. When that happens, I have strong adult language kind of feelings about it. I don't know if it's that kind of podcast, but
it is. Have
yeah, I that's just a shitty thing to do, to scapegoat someone's spiritual practice and say, oh, you bought that rose quartz? Well, that's causing harm. Like, that's not an effective conversation to have. When we know better, we do better. So no one can anticipate us doing better until we have that skill set. So by all means, understand that there are ethical ramifications, that there are sociopolitical ramifications. There's all kinds of stuff that happens when we participate in any free market, not just the crystal one. Like, again, it doesn't help to only focus on one part of this. Like, if we really want things to be better, we got to make it all better. But identifying there's a problem is not the same as saying you should feel guilty for the problem. I don't want anyone to feel guilty for their rose quartz, their fluorite, their malachite. What I would love for them to do is say, wow, I care so much about these crystals and the earth and the people who are involved that I would love to find ways that maybe I can source from a shorter supply chain so I can ensure my dollars are actually going to the people doing the labor. Or that, I understand cobalt mining is really complicated and it's really involved in our devices. So I'm going to maybe try to avoid things that come from those same holes in the ground. So I'm not causing undue stress there. Or maybe we also go, hey, malachite is really deadly to polish. So I want to make sure that the people polishing these beautiful spheres of malachite have PPE on and they're not inhaling that dust and shortening their lifespan. Like there's so many facets to this. And if we can't know, we can't know. That doesn't mean we give up. It just means we start asking questions, because those little questions create really big change. And, when we talk about the idea of psychic self-defense, psychic protection, there are so many other kinds of psychic harm out there. And a big guiding force when writing the book, again, comes to harm reduction. And it relates to this conversation about the market, whether it's about making sure we get the real thing or something that is responsibly sourced. And also that, like, maybe instead of buying all our crystals on Amazon, we are looking for our local metaphysical shops so they don't go out of business. So we keep the community alive, because these are the kinds of support systems that will get us through the heaviest of times. I am so thankful, no matter how weird and sometimes, quite frankly, frustrating, aggravating, terrifying, maddening it got to be with the public, 5 or more days a week in like peak pandemic era. I still got to be there. I still got to contribute, because I wasn't able to do my normal shtick and be of service in other ways. And it was really humbling. But it also felt like it mattered quite a lot to just be there and do the thing, even if it was just, running the shop. Even if it was just saying, oh, that crystal's in this basket on this shelf. Sometimes that's all it is. And other times it's, hey, the world's on fire and I don't feel safe in my body. What can we do about that? And you want to like pat them on the shoulder and say, nothing, but let's curl into a ball together. But that's not an acceptable answer. So we have to be willing to be problem solvers. We have to be willing to say, hey, this is a small action, this act of gratitude. This is a safe space you can be. This is a crystal that might help you feel empowered in little ways. Those are still ways that we can embolden ourselves, bolster our defenses against that kind of psychic miasma that's out there. It's not just about, ghosts and ghouls and things that go bump in the night, although sometimes it's about that too. It's about the very real ways that we seek to make the world a more hopeful and balanced place for all of us.
Yeah, how we are grounded internally is going to help us prepare for any ball curling outside of us.
Exactly.
And the tiger's eye. Nicholas, this has been a phenomenal episode, and I don't want to take you too far past your time. But you have been such an amazing guest, and I appreciate all of the information that you have come on and been willing to share for people that want to dive in more to what you have to offer. Where can they find out more about you?
Well, thank you so much. Thank you all for having me on the show. It's been a real delight. If anyone out there is interested in the book, you can find it anywhere books are sold. Of course, go find your local mom and pop bookstore, your local metaphysical shop. If they don't have it, I'm sure they're happy to order it. You can also find it online in all the usual places. Request it at your local library. There are ways we can make that happen for you. If you want to know about my other works, my classes, all the other things that I've got going on, you can check out my website, which is theluminouspearl.com. Or find me on social media. It's usually at The Luminous Pearl, like insert social media. That's probably, if I'm on it, that's what it is. And I keep a pretty busy schedule of teaching and like a monthly Reiki share online, which is a free community event. I do in-person and online events, mostly in the States, occasionally in other places when I get the opportunity. And I've also got a Patreon out there with like tons and tons and tons. I think it's like several dozen recordings of old classes and workshops, which are also available for folks who want to see like my previous body of teaching. I've got as much as I can out there on that platform too.
Fantastic. That's amazing. Thank you again so much. This has been great. And I'm sure we have so many more topics and questions to dive into. Hopefully we can get you on for another, maybe a part 2 or
Great news. Later this year, I got another book coming out. And that might be a great excuse. It's called The Witching Stones. There's a lot of spirit stuff in there, so it might be a good fit.
Yes.
I would love that. All right, guys, any final thoughts before we wrap this amazing episode up?
Just thank you for coming on. Like the amount of knowledge that you have is it's so great to hear. It's just, you can tell that you can hear the passion behind everything that you're saying. Just, it comes from a place that's just that wants to help people, wants to just give knowledge and just kind of open up their eyes a little bit more to something that's just so important that people just don't necessarily attach to, on an everyday kind of basis. And I think that that's important. I think more people it'll bring more people in, hopefully, because I think it's awesome. I think it's going to be one of those things that just keeps growing and growing and growing. And, I can't wait for the other book as well, because that's going to be real fun to get into.
Thank you so much.
John Thomas?
Nope. I just want to say thank you again. Like BJ said, I think it's overlooked, and thank you for getting the information out there.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, it's an ever-evolving area that is expanding, and you're helping enhance the vocabulary. So this is fantastic. All right, John Thomas, do you want to bring us home?
Yes, I do. I had to make sure I wasn't on mute. That happens a lot. Thank you again, Nicholas, for coming on. Again, pleasure, and so glad the information is getting out there for the people that would like to learn. Thank you to all of our listeners for listening to this episode of 3Haunted Podcast. With your host, I'm John Thomas.
I'm Ashley Lunar Goddess.
And I'm BJ Segura.
If you have any questions, comments, or episode suggestions, please feel free to email us at 3hauntedpodcast@gmail.com. And if you haven't done so already, please like, follow, and subscribe to all of our social media. You don't want to miss amazing guests like Mr. Nicholas here.
And also, don't forget to check out 3hauntedpodcast.com, where you'll find all of our past and current season episodes, as well as guest information and all kinds of awesome merch.
Until next time.